Welcome. It's my great pleasure to talk with Ted Savas of Savas Beatie Publishing today. Thank you, Ted, for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.
To start things off, please tell us about yourself, where you're from, your educational background, and how you ended up as an attorney and then as a publisher.
I'm from North Iowa, graduated from University of Northern Iowa with a BA in history in 81 or so. Got most of a master's degree in American history and European history. Decided I wasn't ready to work for a living yet, so I thought I'd stay in school, and decided law school looked like a good option. I graduated University of Iowa Law School in 86, and I had clerked in California in 85 and loved it, and packed up my car and moved to California in 86. Took the bar, practiced as a litigator for 12 or 13 years every day, and in the meantime started a publishing company sort of by accident, and decided I loved that a lot more than practicing law, and sold my law practice, moved into publishing, and I've been working as a publisher ever since, although I still am licensed as an attorney.
Excellent. Do you have any publishing mentors or people who helped you along the way?
Yeah, I do, actually. Two people some of the old folks in Civil War circles would know. One would be Bob Younger, Morningside Books. Bob was sort of a cantankerous old guy. We used to call him Sweet Old Bob, or SOB Bob. But he was very helpful, and he'd give me a lot of tips, and I really appreciated everything he did. And another was Tom Broadfoot in North Carolina. Tom gave me, me and Dave Woodbury, who was one of my first publishing partners, gave us a table at an event, at a book show. We only had one or two copies of Civil War Regiments ready, and he gave us a corner of a table, and we sold books, and he taught me a lot about setting up a business, how to run a business in terms of publishing, and I really took it to heart, and I still implement his ideas.
Wow. So we know about Savas Beatie and we know about you. So is Beatie your invisible friend?
Yeah, Cat Beatty, it's an interesting story. I'll try to do this as quickly as I can. Cat Beatty was a New York attorney on Fifth Avenue, a pretty big shot in town. And we were going to publish his Army of the Potomac work with Savas Publishing. When I sold Savas Publishing to Perseus Books Group in 2001, Cap and I stayed in touch because we hadn't published his work yet. And he approached me in 2003 and said, Savisky, that's what he used to call me, Savisky. Savisky, you need to get back into the publishing game. And I told him no many times. He finally flew out to California from some court appearance he was at in Nevada. And we sat down and hammered it out. And he said, let's go, let me stake you. You need to get back into the business. And so we did in 2004, and we started Savas Beatie. Unfortunately, Cap, they called him a captain. He was a captain in the Korean War. Cap got sick very quickly and died in 2013, I think it was now. And it was a real blow and a real loss. I really miss him.
Yeah, I bet. So Savas Beatie is often called an independent publisher. What are the hallmarks of being an independent publisher?
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a misnomer. Really, if you look at it, independent really almost means self-published, but it really means not part of the big squad of publishers, not part of the Random Houses or the big groups. But Savas Beatie is a traditional publisher. We are a straight up traditional house. We take your work and we publish it at our cost and pay you a royalty and do the marketing and all that sort of thing. So we're independent in the sense that we're not affiliated with a university or some other organization, and not one of the big five publishing houses, but we are a traditional publisher.
All right, makes sense. So how do you stay in business if, like, university publishing houses have a built-in base of authors?
Well, we have a built-in base of authors too, and we do things a lot differently. I talk to a lot of the different university press directors and different people associated, with them. And I don't really view them as a competitor, although I think they view me as a competitor. We don't do a lot of things that overlap as much. They do a lot more in the last decade, esoteric kinds of things that a lot of our customers don't really read much of. We primarily make our bread and butter on battle studies, campaign studies, strategy and tactics sort of things, some regimental stuff. And so we have a great group of authors. They come to us. We've got many more manuscripts than we can possibly publish. And so we turn away a lot of good material, but we have great authors, and we have repeat authors, which is really the key.
Wow, yeah, I bet. So how do you attract new authors?
Well, mostly they come to us. We don't really advertise for authors. They come to us and they see our books. They see what we do. They see how we market. They see how we develop them. And we have, happy to say, a really good reputation in the field. And so a lot of people who have sort of dragged their feet because they don't want to go to somebody outside the university press world, once they cut their teeth with the university presses and don't need to be published there anymore, they can come to us and actually make some money.
So who submits manuscripts to Savas Beatie, and how do they do that?
Yeah, we have a submission guideline, and it's on our website. You just go on there, click on the homepage. There's a submission link, and follow the instructions. We get anywhere from 1 to 3 a day, sometimes more every day. Yeah, a lot more than we can publish. And the publishing, the submission guidelines, a lot of people don't realize it. They're designed to weed people out. They're designed to find out who can we work with, will they follow directions, because everything's procedural. It's a team effort. You have to be a team player. And if you can't follow directions at the submission level, you're not going to follow directions when we're putting money into your project. And this is true whether you go with Savas Beatie or an agent or anywhere. That whole submission process is a guide to winnowing you out. They're trying to find who can we work with. And so I've told people flat out why I don't publish them when they ask me. And I tell them, well, you're not following directions, you're cutting corners, so we just can't work with you. And so it's pretty important to follow those directions.
Wow. So aside from the weeding process with the guide, how do you ensure that authors have the talent and maybe the temperament to be successful?
Well, the temperament you usually find when you start talking to them early on, and even before you sign their contract, you can sort of get a feel for it. The first part of your question was whether they have the ability to write or ability to turn in a good manuscript.
Oh, I'm talking about their talent and as well as temperament. Yeah.
Well, a lot of them have been published elsewhere, and so I've read their books or I know of them, and it's a small community. Everybody knows the other person in some capacity, so it's pretty easy to pick up the phone and, hey, how's so and so to work with, and how's his writing and how's his editing ability, that sort of thing. So it's not too hard to figure that out, and you figure that out pretty quickly, and I try to figure that out before we sign a contract.
All right. So what exactly is the process for submitting maybe a successful manuscript?
Yeah, the process would simply be hitting the submission button and following the directions. You get it in, and then again, it takes a while. So people get a return email that says, we've got your manuscript or we've got your submission, and we'll let you know if we're interested. And then it takes a while. Most of the manuscripts I look at personally, but I've got 4 or 5 people that I will send them to look at them if I need to. But mostly I can tell very quickly whether it's something, A, that we want to publish, B, that it fills a niche for us, and C, whether it's well enough researched. And of course, the bibliography tells us that pretty quickly, So it's something that we can mold and shape into a proper Savas Beatie title and then put out there that we're proud to put our name on.
So when you choose a manuscript and an author to move forward with, what do you do with that freshly submitted manuscript?
When I first get the manuscript, one of the first things I look at is not the writing, I look at the bibliography. And when I see the bibliography, I immediately know, is it deeply researched? Are there primary accounts in there? Have they been to the typical sort of repositories you should have been researching in? I'm very familiar with all the books and all the literature, and so I can tell right away whether the person's done their homework. If they've done that, then I actually will go and read a chapter. I'll dig and sort of sift through and read little bits and pieces to sort of feel the flow of it, how they're writing, how they're unfolding things. And you can tell pretty quickly whether it's something we can work with and mold.
Makes sense. So are your authors usually amenable to editor ideas?
Well, they better be, or they won't be with us very long. When I first started publishing, Bob Crick Sr. told me, said, Theo, he said, there's a couple things you're going to find out right away. He said, there are people who can write incredibly well. They are phenomenal writers, can't research worth a damn. And there are others who are amazing researchers. They're archive rats. They live there. They find the best material, and they can't write worth a damn. And so he said, finding those two elements together is rare. And he's right. So many times you'll find an average manuscript writing phenomenally researched. Well, it needs a lot of writing assistance and a writing help. Sometimes you'll get something that's brilliantly written but lightly researched. Those are the ones we typically turn away. We'll send them back and say, we really like it, but you really need to add to your research and do this and this and this, send it back to us when you finish. But it's much easier to work with a manuscript that's not that well written, but really well researched, because you can put a good editor with an author and start the editing process, and you end up with a darn good book.
So the attractiveness of books is important to sales. How does your interior, or who does your interior design and your cover artwork?
Sure. Almost all the interior design I originally did because I've done everything in the business from the beginning to the end, including dust jacket design early on. And the reason I did that is because, this will sound kind of crazy, but I come from a family of restaurant and bar owners, right? We're Greeks, we own restaurants. And my grandfather, I'd go in there when I was about 14 and I'd work for him. And he'd be scrubbing the floor, he'd be cleaning the bathroom, he'd be tending bar, he'd be, back playing poker, he'd be doing everything. And I'd ask him, Grandpa, why are you doing that? He'd say, well, if I don't know how to do it, how will I ever know if anybody I hire is doing it correctly? I need to know what it is and how long it takes and what it's worth and all that. And I thought, well, that was really, really good advice. And so I learned how to put together every aspect of a book, and then I could farm it out and know whether I was getting back what I needed and what I wanted. So the design on the interior is mostly templated stuff that I've designed. So if I send it to production, I'll say, why don't you put template C on this one? And then we'll jigger it around a little bit and sort of restyle it a tad, or template F or whatever it is. So that's sort of how we do the inside of the book. The outside, the dust jacket, we ask the authors to give us an idea of what might be available for the artwork. And then we have a wonderful designer. Primarily, we use another fellow in Iowa for some of our design work, but most of it's done in England by a fellow named Ian Hughes. And Ian does just terrific work, and he'll send us back 3 or 4 styles. And then we'll sort of start leaning in one direction, and then we'll edit that and then play with that and change the fonts and layout and design work. And Sarah Keeney, our marketing director, and I and Ian will make the final decision. And then I make the final decision in the end. And then we also send it to our author, just like we do the interior, to make sure they see what it is, that they like it, do they have any comments on it? And we listen carefully, because if you're the author and you've got years of work in your manuscript and you get a book that looks terrible and you're embarrassed by it and you're surprised, you're going to be very unhappy and you're not going to help sell your book. And so we want everybody to be on the team. We want everybody to know what's happening all the way through the process.
Wow, that rather than just springing it on the author, that's a great way to do it.
You know, I'll tell you a real quick story, Mike. I won't tell you the name because I don't want to embarrass the press, but there was a fella that has a lot of Civil War books to his name, and he spent a few years researching a particular book, and he didn't see anything at all until the book showed up one day finished. And it's a major press, a university press. And he opened the book up, was so shocked by how the cover looked and how the interior looked that he closed the book, and he told me he never opened it again. And it's a big book. He said he was that embarrassed by how it was designed and how it looked. So I learned that lesson early on. I thought, I'm never going to do that to an author.
Jeez, that would be awful. So, you know, we often read reviews of some books not having a sufficient number of maps. And Savas Beatie is known for being willing to put in a lot of maps. Why is that? Well,
mostly it's because maps sell books. When I first started publishing, I couldn't stand the fact that there'd be one map every 50 pages. And you'd be flipping to the map and flipping back, and it never really matched the text, and it's off, you know, it's crazy. And the problem is that early on, let's say 20 years ago, maps were expensive to create. I mean, there were very few people who created maps. They were hard to create. So I learned how to draw my own maps. So I started putting them in some of our early books. The Champion Hill books, for example, I think I put 40 maps in that book, or 50 maps. We did all our maps. Dave Woodbury and I did all our maps for Civil War regiments. We wanted to know how to do it. And then we started farming them out. Today, the price of maps has dropped significantly. There are several people who do maps. They're much easier to make now. But they're primarily the cost of the authors. The authors pay for the maps. Most publishers don't want to put a lot of maps in because A, it lengthens a book. But they're harder to work with, especially if you have footnotes, because the flow changes and moving a map around can change things. And that can be a problem. But we don't have that problem in the sense that they're worth the time and effort because they create a better reading experience for the end user.
So tell me, do manuscripts typically have maps in them, or just map ideas?
Some do. Some do. I always tell people at the beginning when they send the manuscript in, don't send us maps, don't send us photos, don't send anything but the text. We don't need to see anything but the text. Some of the stuff we see, the maps are horrific. I mean, they're really bad. They'll hand draw themselves and say they don't need to be changed. They're perfect the way they are. Some people design their own covers. There are a couple that are okay. Most of them are just terrible because it's not what they do, right? But mostly we explain to them, you'll need some maps, contact this person, or this person, arrange something, and let's start talking on that front. I'm sorry about that. I forgot to turn my phone off.
Yeah, no problem. I removed the phones in my office. How long is the typical process from manuscript submission to being on the shelf and ready for retail?
It really varies. Depending on the need we have for a particular season. There are two seasons in the book world. One season is January to June. That's called the spring season. Then there's July to December. That's the fall season. So there's 2 6-month cycles. We work 6 months in advance. So it is May right now. Our fall books are already well into production. Our covers are all done. We're lining up our spring season right now. So you always work well in advance. If we have a need for it, the manuscript is in good enough shape, we could get it into production within 6 months. Typically it's 1.5 to 2.5 years Just depends.
Wow. So, you know, we see that a lot of authors are selling their books at roundtable meetings and conferences and other places. Tell us about this deal with the author and the books. Are they given a number of books to sell, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, authors will get the free copies. I mean, they typically get, half a dozen copies, and then they can buy copies. We allow them to buy copies at 50% off retail. And they can take those and they can sell them to any individuals they'd like. So they can actually make quite a bit of money doing that if they're active on the circuit, if they have social media, if they'll sign the books and ship them. And we encourage them obviously to do that. They also, of course, get a standard royalty based on sales. And so we encourage them to go out and sell their books. We have support people in-house that help them go out and sell their books and set up radio, TV, roundtable events, book signings, that sort of thing.
Excellent. So we know that you must have a stable of readers and reviewers. How does that work?
In terms of how do we get book reviews?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two different kinds of, there's two different sort of divide. The best way to think about it is the book trade and the non-book trade reviews. The book trade would be anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Baker and Taylor, big book chains, Barnes and Noble, that sort of thing. Our distributor handles those review copies. So they'll send to early on to Publishers Weekly and to the different wholesalers, and they'll cover that aspect of reviews. In-house, we'll send out reviews to the non-book trade side. So that would be the people who buy for all the battlefield parks, the different park historians who will review it, the magazines, that sort of thing. So that's the way we divide that process up.
All right. So I know that some of these books are dense and some of them are very long. Do these reviewers really read the whole book, or do they budget just a little?
It's always the question, isn't it? There are some that we know do not, and you can tell by just reading the review, because the review is 90% dust jacket copy. And then at the end, they add the obligatory, this book belongs in everybody's library.
Yeah.
No, they didn't read the book, even though it might belong in everybody's library, but you can tell that person didn't read the book. There are some who will actually get into it and talk about the sources and talk about new things that maybe are covered in the book that aren't covered in other books, new ground that's broken. Honestly, I think one of the best book reviewers around today and for years is Andrew Wagenhoff. He has a CWBA, Civil War Books and Authors webpage. He does marvelous in-depth reviews. I think he really reads either almost all the book or the entire book, and he really knows his stuff. I think he's probably the best reviewer out there today.
Excellent. So let's talk about marketing. How does Savas Beatie market your books?
Sure. There's two different ways. Our publisher handles the book trade marketing. So they handle the Barnes and Nobles and the wholesalers and to most of the libraries and to Amazon and that sort of thing. We've kept all of the non-trade side. So we sell to the individuals, we sell to some independents, we sell to all the battlefield parks, to authors and that sort of thing. So we have an entire department in-house that handles that. So we've got a person who does nothing but acts as a media specialist for authors. So one of the things I used to hear very early on from authors is, I'll write to my publisher, I'll email, I'll call, I never get a response. And that's too bad. It's often true. I mean, it's really sad. And so I decided we're never going to have that. So there's always a person in-house directly that the author can contact. They'll have a call back the same day or within 24 hours. They get email responses. So we really try to be very proactive on that front. And she goes out there, Sarah and Renee just left, but Renee used to be with us and do the same thing. And so they would go out and they would book all the different events for the authors. And Ask the author, do you want one event a month? Do you want 10 events a month? How far can you travel? Do you want to do some television? Do you want to do some radio? What do you think your strengths are? And then we work with them and dovetail their needs and their abilities with whatever's out there. And then we merge all that together and keep them as busy as we can.
All right. So do booksellers typically assist in that process?
To varying degrees. A lot of the independent booksellers are more helpful than the chains. And there's really not many chains left. Primarily, there's just Barnes and Noble. They were the worst of the bunch. But they've gotten a little better in the last couple of years. Borders, which sadly is no longer with us, they were the best. They were terrific. They'd have signs, and our people would come in and they'd be ready to rock and roll, and they'd have the chairs ready to go, and they would have advertised with us, and they were good. And sometimes we'd have people show up for events at some stores, and the manager would say, "Oh, was that tonight? Let's find a spot. Maybe we can get you set up." It was really kind of pathetic. So it just varies on the location.
Yeah. So, I read the whole Harry Potter series, and I figured that they had a huge promotional budget. Are the promotional budget at Savas Beatie huge?
Huge. Well, they're probably huge in the Civil War sense, because I think most Civil War publishers have almost no budget at all. But the budgets, typically they're pretty small, but it depends on the book and it depends on the author. So there are some authors who will tell you, I don't want to buy any of my books. I don't want to try to sell any of my books. I won't take any of my books to any events. I don't really want to be bothered with any kind of radio or anything like that. And as soon as they tell us that, if their book doesn't sell strongly on its own, and most don't without author help today, then there's no money behind that book. I pull it. Because what you do typically, and this is an old method of book selling, is you put out your books for the season and you follow each one very closely. And the one that starts breaking out is the one that you put the money behind. So it's sort of almost like a military attack, right? There's a break in the lines, and that's where the reserves go to exploit it. So you can't tell which book is going to really do well. You're sure book X is going to do terrific, and you put a little money behind it, and it just doesn't do that well. And then book Z surprises you completely and takes off. So you just sort of have to watch the metrics, watch the author, look at the early reviews, and sort of watch all that, and then you put your resources behind that and exploit it. And we tell authors, quite often, if you're not going to help us sell your book, then we have to put our money somewhere else in our time, because time is limited, resources are limited, and you have to back the authors that really want to work hard and sell their books.
Yeah, makes sense. So how far removed from the original manuscript are the final produced books?
You mean in terms of the writing?
Sure.
Well, it depends on the book, right? There are a few authors who are really terrific and write exceptionally well, and really all you need is some proofreading. I would say that's probably 1 out of 5 books. Then there are, maybe a couple of books that need something's in the main body. It really needs to be in a footnote. This part here really is an appendix. We're going to move that over there. You get that sort of juggling around. That's a couple books out of 5, and then it needs proofreading. And then sometimes you have a couple of books that are just exceptionally well researched, but they're just not well written. And we let the author do what the author can do. And then it gets to the point where the author's done all they can do, and then the editor goes in and writes, cleans it up. And sometimes it's significantly edited as much as possible in the author's voice, so that it reflects the author's research and the author's pacing and style. But it's, it needed a lot of surgery. And that's not unusual in the book world. That's true. One of my friends was a New York Times best-selling author. I knew him very well, and he couldn't write to save his life. He outlined his books. He was really could tell a great story in an outline, and he had editors who pretty much wrote the story, but their names weren't anywhere on the books. That's just common. That's not uncommon.
So if you can tell us, what book surprised you most in terms of expectations at the beginning and almost monumental sales at the end?
Boy, that's really interesting. Playing with the Enemy was one of the books that I turned down 3 or 4 times, and it's a baseball World War II book, really magnificent. One of my all-time favorites by Gary Moore, and he submitted it, and we turned it down over and over and over and over. And finally, I started reading the manuscript almost by accident. I took the wrong one to my son's taekwondo class, and I started reading the manuscript there. I thought it was something else, and I loved it. And we took that. I think we did, I don't remember now, 30,000 hardcovers, which is, the average Civil War book sells fewer than 1,000 copies, probably 600, 800,000. Ours sell significantly more than that, typically. But we sold probably 30,000 hardcovers of that. And then we sold rights to Penguin for paperback, and they've sold, I don't know, 50, 80, 100,000 copies in paperback. So it's done very well. In terms of Civil War books, we've had I have to look at the list. We've had so many that have done so well. Sickles at Gettysburg has by Jim Hessler. That book has sold tremendously well for a sort of a niche Union biography kind of a book, because you're cutting off half your audience, right? Typically, Brad Gottfried's Color Atlas books have sold tremendously well. Also, once I start getting into this and talking about it, I'm going to have authors call me and say, "Hey, you didn't talk about my book." But we've had many that have done really exceptionally well. Our Emerging Civil War series by Chris Mikowski and Chris White, they pitched that to me 10 years ago, I think it was now, and I really wasn't sure how it would do, but I thought, well, we'll wade into that pool and see how they do. And they've done tremendously well, and they've helped introduce people to the Civil War because they're easier books to read and understand, and they've been tremendously successful. So overall, we've had a lot of success with a lot of different books.
Yeah, and those are the guys that enjoy going out and talking about their research and how they did it and what the potential reader can expect, and they're really good storytellers.
Yeah, Chris Mikowski is probably one of the hardest working guys I know. I mean, he's always on the phone, he's always calling me, he's always emailing me, he's always got new ideas. He works hard, he edits hard, he works on audio stuff, he leads tours, he maintains one of the greatest blogs out there, Emerging Civil War. So I mean, he's just indefatigable. It's amazing. I wish I had his energy. I used
to. Yeah, didn't we all? So do you have anything to add to the interview here, Ted?
Well, I want to thank you for everything that you're doing, Mike. The roundtable movement is a successful movement, but a lot of them are dying because they're not growing and kind of keeping related to the other groups and sharing authors and doing things together. And you're helping thread those things together and make a strong blanket. And I really appreciate that. And a lot of people do. And a lot of people have told me how much they appreciate what you're doing. So I hope you'll keep up your good work. I just want to tell everybody that what we're doing in the Civil War community, it's a small community. It's hard to make money today in the business. It's hard to stay in business. And all the support people give small publishers and Civil War publishers is really appreciated. And the loyalty people show is tremendous. And we at Savas Beatie, we really can't thank you enough.
All right. Well, thank you, Ted. I've really enjoyed our time together. And now maybe our audience has some questions.